And so we're going to have a fundamental head-on fight about the future of America and the nature of America, which, by the way, was captured a week ago by the arrogance and the dictatorship of your Supreme Court. The idea that by 4-3 a group of lawyers could outvote 62% of the people of California should be an outrage to every citizen in this state. The idea that 3,000 years of tradition and a belief that God has defined marriage could be thrown out, despite the explicit vote of millions of Californians, by a one-lawyer margin, should be turned by the conservative movement of this state into a resurrection of the Rose Bird campaign. And I would... At the risk of meddling, I want to recommend that you put on some seminars on Rose Bird and on Ronald Reagan's role in that, and the fact that by 1976 we had finally defined her enough that she lost. And I think all of you ought to look carefully at what it's going to take to make sure that an constitutional amendment wins this fall. And then you ought to look carefully at what it's going to take to defeat the judges who voted so. I believe, and I am so fed up with, judicial tyranny, whether it's the Ninth Circuit Court or whether it is the California Supreme Court. And I think we as a nation, just in order to defend the right of self-government, need to start firing judges who are arrogant and impose their secular ideology on the nation at large. And by the way, we have an entire section in an earlier book I wrote called Winning the Future, where we talk about Jefferson, who said flatly that judicial supremacy is an absurdity. That would mean we were an oligarchy run by a handful of appointed people. The Jeffersonians, in the Judicial Reform Act of 1802, abolished 18 out of 35 federal judges. That's over half of all the federal judges. They didn't impeach them. They just wiped out their offices. And I am not, frankly, as radical as the Jeffersonians. I would abolish the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And constitutionally, the Congress and the President could do that, and they could create a new circuit and appoint new judges. And the precedent of 1802, there's no question they could do that. And we're going to eventually have that collision because the arrogance of the Ninth Circuit and its continuing anti-American bias on things like whether or not you can say one nation under God are, I think, totally unacceptable to the country. And so I do want to introduce just very briefly. David Lane and Rick Tyler are both going to be working on the issue of returning California law to Californians. Why don't you guys stand up for a second? Maybe you're interested in that topic. They're great friends of mine. So let me say this in closing. Every one of you has griped about the current situation in Washington. Every one of you has felt that the leadership has lost its way, that it's disappointing, that it's depressing, that you're not all that happy with the nominee. I mean, you go down the whole list. My answer to that is welcome to the 1970s. I'm thinking someday about writing an alternative history. We should discuss this sometime. Maybe we could co-author. You know, I write these histories. Several of you have a copy of The Days of Infamy, which is an alternative history where we have Admiral Yamamoto come forward and lead a more aggressive Japanese effort. I'm thinking about someday writing an alternative history in which Governor Reagan turns to Nancy and says about 1979, you know, I am too old and it's too hard and I think it's time for a younger generation. Let's just stay at the ranch and enjoy life. There would today be a Soviet empire. There would today be a dramatically higher tax rate. There would today be a lot more confusion about what it means to be an American. And people forget occasional moments of courage by very small numbers. We are, in fact, writing, Clifton and I are going to be doing a DVD next year on the Pope going to Poland, the 9 days that changed history in 1979, when Pope John Paul II went to Poland at a time before Reagan is elected, when Thatcher has just barely been elected, when the Soviet Empire is on offense, and the first great moral rebirth is led by the first Slavic Pope in history going back home and spending 9 days with the people of Poland, reminding them that they're both Polish and Catholic, and neither of those resembles Soviet tyranny. And from that point on, we had a number of people in the Polish government who were helping us, who were there, who were young people, who were just stunned by that experience. We're also working on a new novel about Christmas Day, 1776. Next time you start to despair, just remember, the Americans had been defeated from Brooklyn through Manhattan, across New Jersey. The Army had collapsed from 30,000 to 5,000. Of the 5,000, 4,000 were too sick to fight. It was Christmas Eve. The river had ice flows. They were sitting there in eastern Pennsylvania. They felt hopeless. And every general advising Washington was opposed to a night crossing with 3 columns to launch a surprise attack at dawn against a professional army. And Washington listened to all of them patiently, because like Reagan, he was an extraordinarily good listener. And like Reagan, he was remarkably firm once he decided. And he said, if we don't win somewhere soon, this army will disappear through desertion. And when this army disappears, we will have lost the revolution. And when we have lost the revolution, they will hang us. Therefore, we have nothing to lose. So we will cross tonight. We'll cross in the dark. And we will surprise them. And by the way, if you go back to Washington, you've got to go to Mount Vernon and see this extraordinary new education center that Gay Gaines raised over $100 million to build. And the film they have of this will bring tears to your eyes. The password that night for the 1,000 men capable of marching was victory or death. So the next time you get ready to quit on America, give up on your grandchildren's future, despair, go home and say, they've blown it, so I'm quitting. Just remember, the third wave of conservatism is going to go precisely as far as your courage, your energy, and your efforts carry it. And with your help, just as Barry Goldwater and Bill Buckley laid the base, and just as President Reagan defeated the Soviet Empire, with your help, we will defeat the enemies of freedom. We will reassert the future of America. We'll create a country capable of competing with China and India and winning in the economy. And we will give our grandchildren a dramatically better future than anybody can predict today. It's an honor to be here. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening, and tune in next time. To learn more about Young America's Foundation, please visit our website at www.yaf.org.